has gone up. This government does deliver and will continue to deliver for pensioners across the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Around 1,800 pensioner households in Lancaster and Fleetwood are eligible but do not claim pension credit. With the rising cost of living, many more pensioners are struggling. So can I ask the Minister whether or not she will lend her support to my campaign encouraging my constituents to check on older friends and relatives to see whether or not they are eligible for pension credit and supporting them to apply for it if they are?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, and I pay tribute to the work that she is doing in her constituency to boost take-up of pension credit. I would love to work with her and all across the House on this very important topic that I think we're all very focused on.
Nigel Mills.
Thank you. The Minister will know that a lot of private pension schemes increase by inflation each year, but inflation is capped at 5%. Would she encourage those trustees of those schemes, where they have a healthy balance sheet, to actually increase their pensions by inflation by the full 10% this year to help out those pensioners who are struggling?
The Honourable Gentleman does a lot of important work in this area. I think what he says is very sensible, and I think that all pension funds need to be looking at what more they can do to support pensioners.
Brilliant. Chair of the Select Committee, Sisti.
Question 19, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2020, as the Right Honourable Gentleman know, the government boosted LHA by almost £1 billion, taking it to the 30th percentile of rents. For those where there is a shortfall, there is the discretionary housing payments arrangements available, and we should all, Mr. Speaker, be mindful of the expense of the support for housing, which is running at £30 billion per year and is projected to rise to £50 billion in 2050.
Sir Steve.
Mr. Speaker, Rightmove reported last autumn that rents in London had increased by over 16% in a year, and yet, as the Secretary of State has said, housing support through the local housing allowance has been frozen since 2020. Will ministers look again in the budget at the level of local housing allowance for the coming financial year?
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman makes a perfectly valid point, but I do think that he needs to see this issue in the round. My fellow ministers have outlined at some length the cost of living support payments that have been made available both last year and were announced in the autumn statement and will be available from April onwards. I've already mentioned discretionary housing payments that have included £1.6 billion of support since 2011. There is, of course, the Household Support Fund, which gained an extra £1 billion for 2023-24. I look forward to appearing before his committee at the end of March, when no doubt we can discuss these matters in greater detail.
Come to topical as Justin Mathers.
Topical question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the House knows, the Prime Minister has asked me to review economic inactivity. We have 9 million people who are economically inactive at the moment, and I will be looking very closely at all those in that review, not least the long-term sick and disabled, those with caring responsibilities, and those over the age of 50 who have retired early.
Justin Mathers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following on from the Select Committee Chair's question, many of my constituents are required to seek a housing solution in the private rented sector but cannot afford it because of the freezing in local housing allowance and also the increase in rents. Can he have a conversation with his colleagues in the Department for Housing, Levelling Up and Communities to see whether they can do more to actually enable councils to widen their lists for the housing register to ensure people actually are able to access housing they can afford?
Mr. Speaker, I can provide the Honourable Gentleman with that reassurance, and indeed there are discussions ongoing between officials in my department and in DLUC, and we will continue those through time. We're very aware of the issue. I have raised the inordinate expense of these measures, but nonetheless it is important that we look at them closely.
Jack Brereton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have some fantastic engineering companies in Stoke-on-Trent, including Don Burr, IAE and Rain Engineering. However, they are struggling to fill what amounts to, collectively, hundreds of vacancies. So will my right honourable friend look at what more we can do to help these companies to recruit people from work into work to make sure these companies have got people back into work?
Well, my honourable friend is right that there are great things happening in Stoke. And we are working with the North Staff's engineering group to develop a sector-based work academy to fill those specialist engineering roles. And there is also a planned jobs fair at Port Vale Football Club, some people's favourite football club, on the 16th of February, when Domber, IAE and RAIN are all invited to attend. And on the 15th of March, DWP are also hosting a jobs fair at IAE's new exhibition centre.
Shadow Secretary of State Jonathan Ashton.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. Now, according to my friends at the Centre for Social Justice, there are around 700,000 people with no work requirement who could go to work if given the right level of support. Now, we put forward proposals. His spin doctors said they were cynical. Then 2 days later, he was briefing he was going to copy them. So when will he introduce reforms to the work capability assessment and access to work to get more people back into the workplace?
The honourable gentleman knows the answer to his own question, which is that we are looking precisely at these matters as part of our review of economic inactivity. He is very well aware of the extensive consultation that surrounded the white paper that we will be coming forward with in due course, and all of those questions that he poses will be answered in greater detail then.
Ashworth.
Economic inactivity has been rising for 3 years. And we on this side of the House want to get Britain back to work. All he can say is he'll bring forward a white paper in due course. Now let me ask him about the long-term sick, because he'll know that a third of the inactive across South Yorkshire are long-term sick, a quarter of the inactive across the West Midlands are the long-term sick. And in his answer to my honourable friend from Barnsley Central, he said he was looking carefully at the long-term sick programmes across South Yorkshire and West Midlands. But actually in December, his department withdrew the funding. So why is he cutting the funding for Andy Street's West Midlands and across South Yorkshire when we need to be getting the long-term sick back to work?
Mr. Speaker, as I have already raised, invested £7 million in the West Midlands engine pilot, and that is a pilot that we're looking very closely at. But the right honourable gentleman criticises us on the employment front. It was, Mr. Speaker, Labour who saw workless households almost double on their watch. Labour that always has unemployment higher at the end of their term of office than when they went in. It is Labour that parked millions of people on benefits with very little incentive to leave those benefits, and it was Labour that left us with 2.5 million unemployed in 2010.
Mr. McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Visiting local businesses in the Colne and Home Valleys and Lindley, it's great to hear that so many are expanding and they have vacancies. They're looking to hire local people. With that in mind, will the Secretary of State join me, please, in commending the excellent work of the Job Centre staff in Huddersfield, who are actually busy preparing a jobs fair on the 2nd of February as they seek to improve people's lives by helping them into work?
Honourable friend for that, for raising Huddersfield Jobs Centre and the extraordinary work that the staff there do. I know that they organise several of these job fairs on a monthly basis, and can I commend him for the support that he is providing to them in that endeavour.
SNP spokesperson David Linden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we've probably just had an insight into one of the kind of battle lines for the next general election, and that's perhaps demonstrated by the front page of today's Daily newspaper. Not something I would normally read, I've got to say, when it talks about a something for nothing Britain. Will the Secretary of State take this opportunity to distance himself from that ridiculous remark? And I would suggest to him that it would be a very brave move by his party to go to pensioners and tell them that their state pension is something for nothing.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have a very clear view on all these matters, which is that the hallmark of a civilised society is one that looks after the most vulnerable, and this government has a very proud record in that respect. And I could go through chapter and verse of all the various measures, not least the cost of living support to 8 million low-income households up and down this country. What I would say is that if there are people, particularly fraudsters and others, who are prepared to abuse the system that is there to support the most vulnerable, then we should have we should not hesitate to come down on those individuals very hard, and they should face the full force of the law.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Would the Minister for Social Mobility and Youth join me in commending the work of Longbridge and Kings Norton job centres and also the Factory Youth Hub in Longbridge for all the work that they've been doing in making sure your young people are equipped with the skills they need to get back into work, making sure they have the dignity of work too, and reducing youth unemployment in Birmingham Northfield?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wholeheartedly agree that work is more than just a pay packet, as we've heard today. And I'm delighted about the impact of over 150 youth hubs like this one at the factory. In fact, I visited the one at the Central Library, but didn't get there, working with flagship employers and small employers. So I'd be keen to see how the youth hub is changing lives and opening up progression for our young people who'd like to learn from his local DWP's team's success.
Helen Morgan.
Mr. Speaker, I've been contacted by 2 separate disabled constituents who've previously been eligible for the warm home discount, but this year of all years they've been told they're no longer eligible because of the ways the various support schemes interact. So I wonder if the Minister or the Secretary of State would agree to meet with me to look into these 2 individual cases, but also the wider issue to ensure that the most vulnerable people aren't missing out on the support that they need.
Well, I'm grateful to her for the question, and of course it's important just to point out that the reform to the warm home discount means that 160,000 more households where a person is disabled or has a long-term illness will receive a rebate as a result of the reforms that have been made, which is expanding the support available. But of course, if she wants to provide me with the details of the particular cases in question, I'll be very happy to have a look at them.
Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the Minister for Disabled People share my enthusiasm for disability confidence, ensuring more employers sign up to it. What discussions are you having with the Migration Advisory Committee to ensure, when considering representations from sectors around things like the shortage occupation list, being a disability confident employer is part of what's considered?
I think it's fair to say, Mr. Speaker, that both he and I have some experience in these matters from previous roles that we've held, and I know for a fact that there is no bigger advocate of disability confident in Torbay than my honourable friend. And of course we want to continue to build on the brilliant work that has happened through Disability Confident, to build on the success that there has been in getting disabled people into work. And of course I think that that should be an overarching mission for the whole of government.
Sir Oldham.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Secretary of State's remarks earlier that he's looking to address the causes of economic inactivity in the over 50s. The people and skills element of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund could be well placed to fund the kind of support that this age group need to get back into the workforce, but the funding's not going to be available until 2024-25, which would be much too late to address the current crisis. Will the Department therefore work with the Department for Levelling Up to bring this funding forward to 2023-24?
The Honourable Lady raises an interesting and important point, and it is certainly the case, Mr. Speaker, that we are in discussions with DLUC on those kind of matters, and perhaps I can leave it at that.
James Morris.
Claiming unemployment benefit has fallen in my constituency over the last year. But would the Minister agree with me that more needs to be done? So would he support the jobs fair that I'm holding on the 3rd of February in partnership with the DWP, Halesowen Business Improvement District, Halesowen College and the Cornbow Centre in Halesowen, so that we can get more people back into work?
Welcome the work that my honourable friend is doing in Halesowen, and he is right that jobs fairs are a vital way forward, not just by the DWP but individual members of Parliament, to drive forward greater employment. And he's also right to say that the in-work progression offer that we are developing is something that can truly make a difference to those who are already in work.
Alex Norris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's clear that nationally led employment support simply isn't working. Why aren't the government matching our commitments on these benches to let local communities take charge of this crucial work so that local support matches up with local labour market need?
Well, I will stand up for the job centres that we have up and down the country who are providing fantastic employment to people up and down the country, and on top of that we're doing the in-work progression offer, about which, as usual, the Labour Party has nothing whatsoever to say.
Lee Anderson.
Speaker, now then, the Rumbo's Cafe in Sutton Ashfield does marvellous work with people with Down syndrome, helping to train them and get them back into the workplace, because people with Down syndrome are living longer and more independently, but they are struggling to get in the workplace. So what more can we do as a government to help people with Downs get into the workplace?
Well, I'm really grateful to my honourable friend And perhaps we organise a visit and we'll come and see this organisation for myself. I had a really rewarding visit to Bristol just before Christmas, and I saw the huge difference that work experience opportunities organised and facilitated by charitable organisations has and the difference it makes. I'd be delighted to visit.
Speaker, last week the Prime Minister became the second holder of his office to have been found to have broken the law while serving in number 10. He has now been issued with a fixed penalty notice, his second in 12 months. But unlike many of my constituents who have been hit with punitive benefit sanctions, the Prime Minister is unlikely to be forced to resort to payday loans and food banks to get by. Will the Minister concede that this government policy of sanctioning claimants for even the most minor and accidental breaches of the rule is simply too severe?
Well, sanctions, Mr. Speaker, quite rightly do play a role in the work of work coaches and job centres, because it is a contract between the job centre, the provision of benefits on one hand, and in many cases for those receiving those benefits an obligation to seek work. And I think where that contract is broken by the individual who is meant to be seeking work, it is only right that a sanction should be available, but it has to be applied with due care, and indeed that is the case.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unemployment is falling in Grimsby, but it still stands at 5.1% compared to the UK national at 3.7%. What is the my roundtable friend doing to make sure that we can get more people into work when we have the vacancies?
Well, my honourable friend is a doughty champion for Grimsby, and she'll be pleased to know that there is a adult social care jobs fair taking place on Wednesday with 10 employers going. There are a whole host of events every single day during apprenticeship week in 2 weeks' time, but we are also rolling out the in-work progression offer to Grimsby starting in March, which genuinely will make a difference and promote greater employment.
ADHD and autism are severely underdiagnosed in women and girls and often misdiagnosed as mood disorders. What discussions has the Minister had with the Health Secretary about the impact this is having on women's ability to access and maintain employment, and what steps will be taken to support them?
Well, I'm really grateful to the Honourable Lady for raising this, and it's fair to say that ministers in the Department for Work and Pensions meet with ministers in the Department of Health and Social Care and ministers across government. We're in the process of appointing the new ministerial disability champions to take a lead on having deep dives into particular issues. I'd be really happy to take that one away to raise with colleagues in DHSC.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Stoke-on-Trent, North Kidsgrove and Torque would like to ask the Minister for Pensions that when is she going to act on the 2017 automatic enrolment review recommendation to lower the age threshold for auto-enrolment from 22 years to 18 and removing the lower limit of the qualifying earnings band so that contributions are paid from the first pound earned.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Automatic enrolment has been a huge success. I know my honourable friend does a huge amount of campaigning on this, and we remain committed to implementing the 2017 reforms in the mid-2020s.
Mr. McVeigh.
During the lockdowns, conditionality was understandably relaxed, but I fear it hasn't returned to pre-COVID levels. So can the Secretary of State assure me that those pre-COVID levels of conditionality, which are so vital to getting people back into work, will return as a matter of urgency?
The Honourable Lady is absolutely right. Conditionality plays a central role in the way the benefit system works and our drive to get people back into work. She is right that they were relaxed during the COVID crisis, and I think it was right that they were. For example, the fact that people were not coming in for face-to-face appointments, that has now been reinstated, and I will be looking at conditionality as part of my review of economic inactivity.
That completes questions. But before we come to the urgent question, may I remind all honourable and right honourable members that while it is perfectly in order to ask questions about the vetting arrangements for ministers and processes in place for managing conflicts of interest, this is not a substantive motion about the conduct of any member. It is therefore not in order to make personal criticisms of the conduct of any honourable or right honourable member. I now call Deputy Leader Angela Rayner to ask her urgent question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster if he will make a statement on his department's processes for vetting ministerial appointments and managing conflicts of interest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her question, to which it's a pleasure to respond. Starting with ministerial appointments. Appointments made to His Majesty's Government are a matter solely for the Prime Minister, in line with his constitutional position as the Sovereign's principal adviser and the head of the Government. It is for the Prime Minister to recommend individuals for appointment. In considering potential appointments, the Prime Minister may receive advice from the Civil Service on matters of propriety and potential conflicts of interest. The Civil Service has no role in approving or vetoing appointments, as appointments are a matter for the Prime Minister. It would not be appropriate for me to comment further on the advice that may be given during the appointments process. It is critical that all Prime Ministers are able to receive advice in confidence. I would not want to do anything to erode that ability. Once an appointment is made, the process for the management of conflicts of interest and potential conflicts is clear and robust and follows the processes set out in the Ministerial Code. It is a responsibility of all ministers to ensure that no conflict arises or could reasonably be perceived to arise between their role and their private interests, financial or otherwise. That is ultimately incumbent on the individual, and this is clearly set out in the Ministerial Code. Ministers should declare and manage potential conflicts of interest, working with their Permanent Secretary and the Independent Adviser on ministers' interests. They are under an ongoing duty to further declare relevant changes to their interests. Honourable members will be aware that the Prime Minister has appointed Sir Laurie Magnus as his Independent Adviser on ministers' interests. Sir Laurie will be taking forward the work on the declaration of ministers' interests in line with his published terms of reference. As the Prime Minister confirmed this morning, the Independent Adviser will also be conducting an investigation to establish the facts surrounding the matters concerning my right honourable friend, the member for Stratford-upon-Avon, that have been subject to media reports over the weekend. I know that Sir Laurie will bring integrity and rigour to the role of Independent Adviser, and the outcome of his work will be made public in due course.
Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question. But we may have a carousel of ministers, but it's the same old excuses every single time. Reports that the then Chancellor of the Exchequer agreed a settlement with the HMRC, including a penalty, raised serious concerns, not just about that case, but standards in this entire government. Can the Minister tell us if the vetting process raised flags to the former Prime Minister about the original appointment, and when exactly did this Prime Minister know? Does he know if and how this conflict of interest was managed? And why was it kept secret, Mr. Speaker? Is there no system in place to prevent a person being actively investigated for unpaid tax being appointed to run the UK's tax system? Maybe it's that absurd, Mr. Speaker, that no one would ever think it would happen. While we understand the confidentiality of the honours process, surely where there's a serving minister is blocked, there is an overwhelming case for sounding the alarm. So did that happen? And where is the report? If not, why is there a lower bar to get into this cabinet than there is to get a knighthood? Number 10 apparently still doesn't know if other ministers are in dispute over their own taxes. So what is the Prime Minister doing about it? Last week, he told the House all questions had been answered, and he was told that there was no outstanding issues. Yet now, the Independent Adviser is investigating. So will he publish the terms of reference? And why does the Prime Minister need an adviser to tell him that this conduct is unethical? If this isn't a breach of the ministerial code, surely the code itself is wrong, Mr. Speaker, and it's the Prime Minister's job to fix it. If the Prime Minister came clean about what he knew and when, and took responsibility for the conduct of his own cabinet, would we need yet another investigation into another member of his top team? Even now, Number 10 says the party chair retains the Prime Minister's full confidence. How can the Prime Minister claim to deliver the integrity, professionalism and accountability that he promised, while his Conservative Party chair still sits in his cabinet?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We follow a proper process under the Ministerial Code. Interests are required to be declared. They are required to be shared through the Ministerial Code process and discussed with permanent secretaries. I am absolutely confident that the usual process will have been followed in the appointment process by this Prime Minister for the right honourable gentleman. And if there are issues to be raised in respect of historic activities, as was suggested by this weekend's press, that is a matter for the independent adviser to look at. And his findings, the summary of his findings, will be published in due course. Integrity, accountability are critical, as is professionalism. And this government will wait and hear the facts before taking decisions based upon those facts. And I think the Right Honourable Lady would do well to do the same.
Richard Fuller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's a great shame that the processes of the proprietary and ethics team of our civil service are being called into disrepute by the comments by the Honourable Lady opposite. We have to accept in public life there are times when you may be asked to serve in government. When you go through that process, you are required, quite rightly, to disclose absolutely everything that might cause conflict with you being a Minister of the Crown. Does my right honourable friend agree that that process can only survive when there is both confidentiality about your disclosures and tolerance on all sides whilst that process is completed?
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for what he said is absolutely right. There is, for people being called into government, there is a proper process. There is a requirement for full disclosure. And for that process to continue to be meaningful and to work for decades into the future, you need to retain confidentiality. Confidentiality has to be part of it, and the right way forward, when issues have been raised, is for the independent adviser to look into it, as indeed he is doing.
SNP spokesperson John Nicholson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Here's what we know about the appointment of the BBC chair. The BBC chair, Richard Sharp, helped arrange a £600,000 loan for the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip, weeks before he was chosen by the former Prime Minister to become BBC chair. Mr Sharp appeared before the Culture Select Committee on which I sit. We grilled him about his £400,000 gift to the Conservative Party. However, he did not disclose his role in getting the man appointing him a huge loan. Mr Sharp, the former Prime Minister, and the cousin offering the loan dined together at Chequers pre-loan and pre-appointment. The former Prime Minister's spokesperson says, "So what? Big deal." The Cabinet Office ethics team told the former Prime Minister to stop talking to Mr Sharp about his finances. Ministers told other applicants not to waste their time applying. The appointment was to go to the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip's friend, the Tory donor. Even by the grubby standards of this government, it's all a bit banana republic, is it not?
Who's the Chief Executive of the SNP?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable for his question. As the Honourable Gentleman knows, there was a very robust process in place for the appointment of the chairman of the BBC, including a pre-appointment hearing. I read the transcript this morning in which the Honourable Gentleman played his usual prominent role in grilling the appointee, pre-appointment. It was an incredibly robust process with an independent panel of 5 members that went through that process. And just to reassure the House, I understand that the Commissioner in Public Appointments is going to double-check that that went through, process was absolutely consistent with the proper governance expected of these appointments. And I know that the Chairman of the BBC has invited the Senior Non-Executive Director of the BBC to discuss with the Board to make certain that all relevant conflicts of interest were properly disclosed. So there are 2 processes that are ongoing, but this was a very robust process.
Angela Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I shouldn't be astonished, but I am astonished at the brass neck of the shadow leader of the opposition for suggesting that the Prime Minister didn't need to ask his independent adviser on this when they spent months calling for an independent adviser to be appointed. Is my right honourable friend aware of any plans by the independent adviser to publish an updated list of ministerial interests?
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady, and she's absolutely right. The other side of this House have been calling for an independent adviser for months. One gets appointed, and it's not good enough. You need to take all the decisions by yourself, devoid of all the facts. And it is useful to have an independent adviser in hand to deal with these issues when it is appropriate. And yes, to reassure the Honourable Lady, my understanding is that the independent adviser plans to do a publication on ministerial interest prior to his report in May.
Karen Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee on which I sit is ready to help and looks forward to meeting the new ethics advisor. I think from what the Minister has said, the Prime Minister has said that there are questions to be answered. The Minister has been very careful to say that the filling of the ministerial code is up to the individual, which is correct. So is he trying to tell us, did the Prime Minister know that the member for Stratford was due to be investigated?
Minister.
The Prime Minister will have had the benefit of the usual appointments process being undertaken, so he would have had full disclosure regarding the interests of the Right Honourable gentleman as disclosed at the time when the Prime Minister made his appointment as Chairman of the Conservative Party.
Mahendra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has correctly asked his independent adviser on ministerial interests to establish the facts on this matter. Does my right honourable friend agree that we must not prejudge the outcome and allow this process to conclude?
I do agree, Mr. Speaker. That is the purpose of having an independent adviser. He's been asked to investigate, to work out exactly what the facts are, and we should not. It's ill-judged to decide before you actually know all the facts that pertain. That is that process we're undergoing at the moment.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure we all remember that first speech from Downing Street when the Prime Minister promised us integrity, professionalism and accountability at every level. Unfortunately, we've seen precious little evidence of that so far. And this weekend, yet more doubt has been heaped in the minds of the electorate, my constituents certainly, about whether they can trust politicians in general. So does the Minister accept that unless something is done very quickly about the vetting and management of conflicts of interest, further damage is going to be done in the confidence in this place, the British public?
Mr. Speaker, we have the Nolan Principles and we have the Ministerial Code. Both are extremely important documents and extremely important approaches. The Honourable Lady refers to professionalism and she's right. But part of professionalism is making certain you take decisions based on all the facts. And I know she'll respect the fact that it is useful to have those established, but I concede to her definitely those should be established swiftly.
David Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree that beneath the bluster from the benches opposite, what they're really saying is there's various information they don't know the answer to, that they don't have the facts about, not least because HMRC doesn't comment on the individual tax affairs of people, and therefore it's absolutely right the independent adviser should be allowed to collect those facts and publish them to set the record straight.
Minister.
Indeed, I've got absolutely no doubt my right honourable friend will cooperate in every way with the independent adviser to make certain that all the facts are known. He will go through that process. The independent adviser, in due course, will come to his conclusions, and the summarised conclusions will indeed be published.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister stood on the steps of 10 Downing Street and promised the nation that he would act with integrity, and yet here we are again. Isn't this whole affair yet another point of proof that where there are conflicts of interest, it's far more likely you're going to have conflicts of interest when you've got a government of the super rich for the super rich?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I could never have guessed I'd have a question along those lines from the honourable gentleman. The important thing, the Prime Minister said, integrity, accountability and professionalism. That is absolutely right. That absolutely underpins this government, and part of that is making certain you have the facts, and that is what we are undertaking to do through the auspices of the independent adviser.
Clive Efford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Ministerial Code seems to now be a set of guidelines. This is starting to sound like a script from Pirates of the Caribbean. But can I ask the Minister, if someone has disclosed that they are in dispute with the Inland Revenue about their taxes, is it appropriate to then appoint that person as the Chancellor of the Exchequer? Surely that matter should have been resolved before such an appointment took place.
Minister?
The Honourable Gentleman will have to excuse me. I do not know what was disclosed, and nor does the Honourable Gentleman. That is why we have an independent adviser making certain that we have the facts addressed.
Sir Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The current chairman of the Conservative Party went on to television before he settled his tax debt and said that his tax affairs were, quote, fully paid and up to date. We now know that statement was untrue, don't we?
Minister?
I've got a great deal of respect for the Honourable Gentleman, but he knows I don't know the answer to that question. I genuinely don't. But I've got no doubt that the work of the independent adviser will establish the facts, and that will be reported to the Prime Minister.
Stella Preety.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The challenge here for the Minister is that the original allegations arose in July of last year, publicly, and subsequent evidence that indeed lawyers were instructed to try and suppress those allegations, well before any appointment made by his political party or indeed by the Prime Minister. Now, the Minister talks about allegations arising this weekend. Whose due diligence was lacking? Is it the Cabinet Office? Is it the Conservative Office? Or are we just not being told the whole truth on this matter?
Minister.
The full process would have been undergone in terms of my right honourable friend's appointment to the government as chairman of the Conservative Party, or appointment to the Cabinet Office, when he was appointed by this Prime Minister. That was clearly a period after the July commentary in the press. So I don't know what was disclosed. I imagine everything was disclosed, but that is a matter for the independent adviser to ascertain.
Ben Bradshaw.
BBC journalists have to spend a great deal of their time defending the BBC's impartiality and integrity from criticisms from all sides in this country. How is their job made easier by the revelation that the current BBC chairman involved himself in the private financial affairs of a former Prime Minister before he was appointed to the job, something that both he and the Prime Minister should, under civil service rules and BBC rules, have disclosed to the Independent Appointments Commission, which apparently, according to former Commissioner Sir Peter Riddle, neither did?
Minister.
My understanding is that both the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge and the gentleman in question have both said that no financial advice was provided from one to the other. That's my understanding. And I do know that the chairman of the BBC has invited the senior non-executive of the BBC to look into his disclosures to make certain everything was done properly. A process that also will be undertaken by William Shawcross as the Commissioner for Public Appointments to make certain that that process, which appeared to be an extremely robust process, indeed involved drilling before the Honourable Gentleman and others in front of the Select Committee, was absolutely consistent with the Government's rules on these appointments.
Kevin Brennan.
Well, actually, that's an interesting point the Minister's just making, because on that very point, of course, before he appeared before the Select Committee, the candidate had to fill in a questionnaire, and he had to answer the question, do you currently or potentially have a business, financial or non-pecuniary interest or commitment that might give rise to the perception of a conflict of interest if you are appointed? Now, doesn't the Minister agree that helping to arrange an £800,000 loan for the person ultimately responsible for your appointment should have been declared in response to that question?
Minister.
But the Honourable Gentleman is making a statement there about helping to arrange a loan. I don't know the basis on which he makes that assertion, but I know that all matters to do with any conflicts of interest or perception of conflicts of interest are going to be looked at by the BBC under that process established by the Chairman.
Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, on Wednesday, the Prime Minister stated there were no outstanding issues. By the weekend, the Prime Minister ordered an independent investigation. Can the Minister ensure that all of the information that escalated this from nothing to see to an internal independent investigation is placed in the library?
Minister.
What is absolutely the case is that a summary of the findings of the independent advisor and the outcome of that work will be shared with this House.
Peter Dowd.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A person is 23 times more likely to be prosecuted for benefit irregularities than tax irregularities. Yet tax irregularities lose the economy 9 times more. So does the government have any plans to redress this imbalance?
Absolutely. Minister.
There is a huge focus across government, and I know this from my work inside the Cabinet Office, in making certain that we get after tax evasion in all its forms. It's incredibly important that we do, and that we cut waste across government, particularly when it comes out of fraudulent behaviour. That's what we do every day. HMRC is responsible for following up and making certain that people pay the tax that's owed.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I just want to tell the House, from my constituents, I'm hearing that they are heartily sick and tired of reading these stories incessantly about tax irregularities, cheating and fraud, and the self-serving elite. And faith in politics and in this institution is at an all-time low, as it is with the BBC in light of these revelations. And the one common denominator, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that party opposite. And this is only ever going to be cleaned up once this lot are out of the door and out of government.
I'm not certain of the question was, but I certainly disagree with the honourable gentleman in terms of the tone he takes. And I do think we have an incredibly valuable organisation in the form of the BBC. I, for one, support it. And I think it's unfortunate to start making allegations about the whole of the BBC on the basis of something, the facts of which are disputed.
Cat Smith.
Are there any other government ministers currently in dispute with the HMRC around their tax arrangements?
Minister.
This is a matter for individual ministers to talk to go through the proper process for the ministerial code. That's what everybody does. That is a requirement under this government, as it's been the requirement under all governments. So you have full disclosure in that process, and you need to talk to your permanent secretary, and it's absolutely critical that no conflicts of interest are established or indeed perceived conflicts of interest are established.
Alex Cunningham.
Right, Madam Deputy Speaker. Will the inquiry confirm the nature of the agreement between the Right Honourable Member for Stratford-on-Avon and HMRC?
Minister.
I've got every confidence my right honourable friend, the member from Stratford-upon-Avon, will be totally open with the independent advisor. This is an independent advisor conducting a report for the Prime Minister, and I'm sure he will be absolutely open with the independent advisor so that the facts can be fully established.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With respect, the Minister is attempting to balance on the head of a pin with regard to Richard Sharp's involvement in the loan to the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister. He may not have provided advice, he may not have arranged it, but he clearly was involved in the introduction. And on that basis, should he not have made the declaration referred to by my honourable friend from Cardiff West when he appeared in front of the committee?
Minister.
Obviously, Mr Sharp felt that that was not required. That was not the case. I understand that a process was put in place to separate him from the loan arrangements. And as I say, Mr Sharp has asked the Senior Non-Executive Director at the BBC to ensure that all matters in terms of disclosure were followed correctly by him in his process.
Luke Pollard.
Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister tell us if any government ministers were informed that the Conservative Party chair was blocked from receiving an honour, And if so, did the government take any action after receiving that news?
Minister.
I genuinely don't know the answer to that question, Madam Deputy Speaker. There is a process for honours and awards which is kept highly confidential. I don't know whether the right honourable gentleman was up for an award or indeed whether that was blocked. So it would have been a very tight process. I don't know if there's any ministerial involvement in that process.
Tamanjit Singh Desi.
Thank you very much. Madam Deputy Speaker, here we go once again, debating after being angered by the lack of ethics and alleged serious wrongdoing by government ministers. But despite the Prime Minister making big promises about integrity, professionalism and accountability, we know he's going to do diddly squat about it because he is too weak, because he is beholden to those very cabinet ministers to cling on to power somehow. So does the minister not think that the British people will smell a rat if they see the Conservative Party chairman, who as Chancellor was supposed to be in charge of the government's finances at the time, whilst trying to strike a multi-million-pound tax deal with the HMRC for alleged serious wrongdoing?
The honourable gentleman's view of the government and mine come from different perspectives. I've got a huge amount of time for my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, who's leading this government in the right directions, and I have to say that he is unwise, I think, to make take a view on the outcome of an inquiry that has not yet properly commenced. But it will. The independent adviser will get there and will establish the facts.
Simon Lightwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister confirm whether the Right Honourable Member for Stratford-on-Avon will make his tax affairs transparent to any investigation by the independent adviser? And can the Minister confirm that the Prime Minister will set that as a requirement of the investigation?
Minister.
I thank the honourable member for his question. As I absolutely make clear, I cannot imagine circumstances under which my right honourable friend would not wish to be fully transparent with the independent adviser. That would be necessary for him to do his job, and that will enable him to establish the facts.
Sir Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm not going to get into the specifics of the individuals concerned, but following on from the question from the honourable lady from Guildford, I do want to know about the specifics of why we don't have in the public domain yet the financial interests of all ministers. The list that's on the website at the moment is 243 days old. It's not even an accurate list of ministers. It's not even an accurate list of the last set of ministers or the set of ministers before that. It's 90 days since this government was in place. There are people who are now ministers who weren't even a member of either house. Who don't appear anywhere. Surely, the public ought to know within a week or so of a minister being appointed what all their financial interests are. Why can't we have that? And why have we got to wait another 3 months, is what he said earlier. Another 3 months before we find out what all the financial interests are of ministers. We should know it now.
Minister.
It may be 3 months, it may be 3 hours, Madam Deputy Speaker. I said by May, is my understanding. So I can't commit to a date because I'm not the independent adviser, and he has got work to do to publish those, but my understanding is that there will be an updated list of financial interests published before his report is out in May. That's my understanding.
Thank the Minister for answering the urgent question. Urgent question, Ed Miliband.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy if you will make a statement on families having prepayment meters forcibly installed in their homes by energy companies.
Minister Graham Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government recognises the importance of protecting customers and including those who are on a prepayment meter. That's why, Madam Deputy Speaker, this weekend the Secretary of State set out a 5-point plan on prepayment meters. He wrote to energy suppliers calling on them to take every step to support consumers in difficulty. The government wants to see much greater efforts from suppliers to help consumers in payment difficulty, including offers of additional credit, debt forgiveness or tools such as debt advice. Suppliers have been asked to commit to stop moving households to a prepayment meter wherever possible, and asked to reveal the number of warrants they've applied for in recent months. It's part of a drive to increase transparency around prepayment meter installations. There are reports that the courts are handling batches of applications for warrants. So Bayes is working with Ofgem and the Ministry of Justice, and I'm pleased to see the Courts Minister beside me today, to ensure that the process by which suppliers bring these cases to court is fair, is transparent and supports vulnerable customers. The Government has also urged suppliers to take action on the increasing the number of vouchers being redeemed under the Government's Energy Bills Support Scheme. We've published a list of supplier redemption rates showing who is best meeting their responsibilities and those who need to do more. The Secretary of State has written to Ofgem asking for more to be done to make sure suppliers protect vulnerable consumers. This includes revisiting their approach to the enforcement of supplier compliance, as well as the urgent publication of recent investigations outcomes into vulnerable customers. I will be meeting energy suppliers, Ofgem, Energy UK and Citizens Advice later this week so as to discuss these matters further. These actions come on top of the cost of living support on an unprecedented basis that the Government has put in place, including the £400 discount under the Energy Bills Support Scheme and the Energy Price Guarantee, saving on top of that £400 a typical household £900 this winter with equivalent support in Northern Ireland. Finally, we are considering a new approach to consumer protection. The Government will work with consumer groups and industry to consider the best approach, including options such as social tariffs, as part of wider retail market reforms.
Shadow Secretary of State Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad the Government has in the last few days finally woken up to the fact that we have a national scandal around prepayment meters. The question is whether the Government's actions will stop the scandal, and I fear the answer is no. The Secretary of State could only say in his letter published yesterday that he, and I quote, would expect that the volume of prepayment meter installations and disconnecting households will start to subside over the coming months. Madam Deputy Speaker, start to subside is no comfort for thousands more people facing bailiffs and being disconnected. Labour called for a ban for at least the course of this winter on the forced installation of PPMs in order to ensure that the government, companies and the regulator reformed a broken system. And let's be clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a broken system. No proper criteria for what forced installation being a last resort means, no clear definition of the vulnerable, no proper clarity about the credit that should be offered to people on PPMs, no proper rules on debt repayment, and people on PPMs, the most vulnerable in our society, paying most for their energy, a prepayment penalty. So will the Minister answer three questions? First, isn't the best thing he can do to prevent hardship this winter is to impose a temporary ban on the installation, on the forced installation of prepayment meters? That is the way to protect thousands more falling into misery. Second, does he agree that, particularly in this cost of living crisis, it is quite wrong that those on prepayment meters are paying more for their energy, and will he take action to end the penalty? And third, will he pledge to look at the system in other countries where nobody can forcibly be cut off, as we do with water in the UK, with a minimum amount of power supplied to all households? Madam Deputy Speaker, energy companies are forcing their way into people's homes with millions disconnected by the back door. Government expressing regret, writing letters, having meetings is not enough. Only a ban will do.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, we have already seen a response, I think, from suppliers today to the calls from the Government. What we've got to look for is to be as effective as possible in affecting change and doing so now. And we believe that the Government calls and indeed engagement with suppliers alongside that of Ofgem is the right approach. And it's of course, suppliers must exhaust, as they're required to do, all other alternatives before forcing the installation of a prepayment meter. But it's also it's worth remembering what we don't want to have is a system, and I understand, we too once were in opposition, the desire to come up with seemingly superficially popular policies. What we don't want to do is create a system where, in fact, more people are forced into debt, more people end up with bailiffs and are drawn into the court system. That's exactly what we wish to avoid. And for many consumers, prepayment meters are in fact a useful tool to allow them to manage their credit and make sure that they don't get drawn into the court system in that way. The right honourable gentleman, if the right honourable lady were to stop chuntering even for a moment, asked me about the penalty, as he put it, of higher costs. The standing charge is a fixed charge which covers the cost of live supply, controlled by Ofgem. The system, which I think was in place when the right honourable gentleman was minister, was that the costs should reflect the actual cost of providing the service. So Ofgem manages that. But I agree with the right honourable gentleman, and this is something we should look at. That's why we're going to look at social tariffs. We want to look at whether those costs should be socialised going forward. But this is a long-standing situation which we are seeking to address. The whole system right now is under stress. The system for energy supply because of the energy crisis, and it is right that we make moves with it sensibly and not having perverse outcomes to ensure we protect the most vulnerable. On the issue of not forcibly cutting people off, again, I'm always open to look at these issues, but of course a lot of people will manage the way they use heat and electricity, and it is somewhat different to water. But again, we want to make sure that we get the balance right, protecting the most vulnerable and making sure that we have a system that builds on the unprecedented protection for consumers that we brought in this winter.
Philip Hollowbone.
Energy consumers on prepayment meters are amongst the most vulnerable energy consumers, and in the face of the biggest ever hike in domestic energy prices, getting financial support to these people is more important than ever. Whilst it's good news that 99% of energy bill support payment vouchers have been issued, it's alarming that only 71% have been redeemed. Scottish Power have only redeemed 64%. Other companies like Bulb have redeemed 79%. So what can the Minister do to put a rocket underneath companies like Scottish Power to make sure this money gets into the hands of those vulnerable consumers as quickly as possible?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and that's one of the reasons that we've published that list today. Transparency is the best form, of disinfectant, and I expect exactly the conversations we want to have as suppliers with their teams. The CEOs will be asking, why are we at the bottom of this list? We want competition between suppliers, but all of us have a role to play as well. It's a whole society front to make sure that people are aware that these vouchers are there. People who are maybe in the greatest difficulty, maybe the least likely to open the envelopes. We've looked at the design of the envelopes. We're looking at every front, and we want to make sure we get the message out there to people that on prepayment meters that those vouchers are there, they're entitled to their support, and like my honourable friend, I'd like to see the take-up increased.
Yvonne Faval.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Recently, the newspaper reported that Wigan Magistrates Court's been granting around 2,000 disconnection warrants each month. On one day in December, 496 were granted in under 4 minutes, without magistrates even knowing the names and addresses of those people, let alone their circumstances or vulnerabilities. Forcing customers into a situation where they pay the highest rates for their energy and are at risk of self-disconnection without any discussion of their circumstances is patently wrong. Will the Minister ensure that this travesty of justice doesn't continue any longer and implement a ban on the forced installation of prepayment meters?
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her question. Of course, before the suppliers do go to that, they are required by Ofgem to ensure this is absolutely a last resort. So that is before you get to the stage of the courts. But as I said in my opening statement, we're working closely with the Ministry of Justice to ensure that the courts process as part of the overall system is fit for purpose and provides the maximum protection possible.
Richard Graham.
Madam Deputy Speaker, mortgage providers now do well engaging with customers, managing difficulties and greatly reducing the number of repossessions. Does my right honourable friend therefore agree that energy companies should do likewise rather than turning at the slightest pretext to prepayment meter warrants? And if the numbers of warrants don't come down, will my right honourable friend agree that more should be done to have specific reduction targets?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and he's absolutely right. We've got to make sure that suppliers are all fulfilling the requirements that are set by Ofgem. Ofgem did an inquiry looking at the treatment of vulnerable customers by the energy suppliers and found weaknesses across the board. and is engaging with suppliers on compliance, and the Secretary of State wrote to Ofgem again in the last few days to reiterate the importance of making sure that that compliance work has real teeth and that suppliers fulfil the obligations under which they're under to protect these people.
Vera Hophouse.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Prepayment meters enforce a poverty premium on some of the most vulnerable people in society. My prepayment meters bill will stop their installation during one of the worst winters in living memory. In just over 30 days, the government will allow my bill to fall, but it's not too late. Will the Minister consider to supporting my bill?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. As I've said already, we are looking at the treatment of vulnerable customers overall, including on the issue which she raises through her bill.
Ruth Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm incredibly concerned to hear the reports of the number of vulnerable customers who are being moved on to prepayment meters, and to hear energy companies quoted in the media as saying that higher energy prices are here to stay, implying that the fall in wholesale prices won't be passed on to our constituents. I welcome the action that the government's taken on both issues, but can my right honourable friend set out what steps are available to the government if energy suppliers do not play fair, and reassure my constituents that he will take them if needed?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for her question. Suppliers are required to provide emergency and friendly hours credit to all prepayment meter customers, and where a supplier identifies that a customer who is in a vulnerable situation has or is self-disconnecting, then they must offer them additional support credit where it is in the customer's best interest to do so. Ofgem warned suppliers way back in June 2018 that PPMs should only be installed as a last resort for debt collection, and they banned forcible installations for vulnerable consumers in 2017. We are absolutely watching this to make sure that we have the right steps in place, and will take further steps if required to make sure that suppliers live up to their obligations.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. What possible justification is there for forcing people to sit in the cold and the dark because they've been required to have a prepayment meter connected which they cannot afford to top up? 25 years ago, we had this same debate over water disconnections, and society decided it would no longer be lawful to deny any human being access to water. Have we not now got to the point where, similarly, our constituents should be entitled, in all cases, to light and to warmth?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, heat and light, and not least as driven by the current energy prices, constitute a significant cost to families and to the nation. And we have to, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have to balance out, as we are with system, to provide additional credit, to provide support for people. We also have to make sure, having had 30 suppliers close business with high costs imposed on the system and thus on consumers, we need to get the balance right so that we have a system which encourages people to pay their bills, but also protects those who most need help.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his statement? And does he agree with me that I have a number of constituents who use prepay meters? Should it not be the case that energy companies this winter are using all their efforts to focus on supporting those constituents with their energy costs? He's already mentioned the voucher scheme, rather than trying to forcibly transition them onto prepayment meters.
Minister.
My honourable friend, as ever, is absolutely right, and that's a really important part in the message which you're sending out today, and I think this urgent question helps strengthen that message to suppliers and others to ensure that people who are in a vulnerable position are supported to the best extent possible.
Patrick Grady.
Deputy Speaker, seeing as the Minister is all about encouraging and asking companies to do things rather than actually enforcing any action, I wonder if you might encourage or ask the energy suppliers if they can publish how much interest they earn from money that is uploaded upfront onto prepayment meters before it's actually expended on electricity and energy.
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for that question, and I will write to him with an answer. Why not?
Paul Bristow.
Madam Deputy Speaker, too many people in Peterborough are on prepayment meters, and the forced installation of prepaid meters in places like Peterborough, where the most vulnerable have to pay more, needs to stop. What more can he do to ensure that energy companies are looking at every possible avenue to ensure that those in my city with the least ability to pay are not paying the highest energy prices?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. As I say, the system which we inherited and exists today reflects the costs of supply, and Ofgem supervise that and ensure that's the case. And alongside my honourable friend and others across the House, be interested to look at that again to make sure we get a system with the right balance.
Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is fundamentally unfair that people with a prepayment meter pay more for their energy costs, whether they have chosen that prepayment meter or not. They have the same energy coming through into their homes that everybody else has. And the argument from the energy companies that somehow this is justified because it's more expensive falls completely flat when you find out many are being moved from smart meters straight over to prepayment meters. So will the Minister look at taking enforcement action to stop those on prepayment meters being charged more?
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her question. Switching any customer from smart credit to smart prepayment can only take place after an energy supplier has gone through a prescribed process, in the same way as if they were going to fit a prepayment meter to replace a traditional credit meter. The energy regulator Ofgem has rules in place that restrict the force fitting of a prepayment meter or switching of smart meters to prepayment mode on those in arrears, except as a last resort.
Anthony Mangnall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I do feel that the government needs to offer a clearer explanation for why those on prepayment meters have higher energy charges. I think that's the least we can do. But could I just ask the Minister, for those who find themselves in better financial situations after the Christmas period, but who were on prepayment meters and who are now trying to transfer back across to credit meters, what help and support is being given to them? Because in some instances there are penalties to do so, and it should not be right that any energy company is putting a penalty for those who wish to transition away from prepayment meters.
Well, I agree with my honourable friend, and it's important to make sure that people don't find themselves caught in a cul-de-sac. In terms of the government laying out the rationale for higher costs, it is absolutely, and I think I've said on 2 occasions, so I hope I've at least set the rationale out, whether you agree with it or not. The one we inherited and that subsists today is that it is cost reflective. And Ofgem, which is the regulator, supervises this and ensures that no charges are imposed that do not reflect the additional costs of providing energy through that particular methodology. Whether we should change that is a separate matter, but I hope I've at least been clear in explaining the rationale that we inherited from the right honourable gentleman and others previously.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
People living in North Wales are at the thin end of the cost of living crisis. Many of them last year paid the highest electricity prices in the UK, and the cost for those on prepayment meters was higher still. Recent figures by Citizens Advice show how precarious access to energy is for prepayment meter customers in Wales, with 32% being disconnected last year because they couldn't afford to top up. We've heard that he won't ban forced installation of prepayment meters. So will he give Welsh Government the power to step in and put people before private energy profit?
Minister.
Well, I entirely reject the premise of the honourable lady's question. We're not putting people, behind the private energy company profits. Quite the contrary. We're trying to ensure we have a system which doesn't stop vulnerable people getting caught in debt, getting bailiffs coming to the door, being further impoverished by a system which doesn't help them. And that is what we are seeking to balance. And as I've said, we are going to consider this in the round going forward, because the system, and most of all, people such as those that the honourable lady refers to, are under a stress that has never been seen before.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The scrutiny and support the Minister says the energy companies should be putting in place is not happening, so there's no point in hiding behind the words, because 600,000 people were flipped over onto prepayment meters last year. So why won't he, and can he give real reason, put a moratorium until this mess is sorted out on anyone moving over onto prepayment meters, and also reverse those people which have been forced onto these high tariffs?
Well, the
Minister.
speediest way this winter to make an alteration to this is to call on the companies to do everything possible to avoid doing it. And we've already seen suppliers today suggesting that there are some who have already managed to do it and others, and that does, of course, throw up the question as to whether we should seek a long-term moratorium. That's something to look at. But right now, by publishing the data, by urging them to cease using this except as an absolute last resort, which is supposed to be the requirement anyway, I hope to see those numbers collapse as soon as possible. It is the fastest way that we can make a difference now.
Catherine West.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister needs to get a grip. The constituent's written in to me to say that she's cut down to have 1 shower a week. Another saying, I'm mostly washing in cold water, but I've recently started getting the beginnings of a painful arthritis in my fingers as a result. How low do people have to fall between the government getting a grip, taking back control and getting on top of this problem so that our constituents can have the basics of a good life?
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her question. Of course, the government is doing unprecedented 3 layers of support for consumers, from the cost of living support for those on benefits, the £900 reduction in energy bills this winter, and additionally the £400 energy bill support scheme, as well as help for those on alternative fuels. The government is bending over backwards within what is an unprecedented and tight situation, precisely to help constituents such as those the honourable lady mentioned, because that's what we've got to bear in mind. People who are the most vulnerable, who are struggling, especially at a time on a day like this when it is so horribly cold and people are struggling.
Kenny McCaskill.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Legacy prepayment meters number about 300,000 in Scotland and 2 million in the UK. Many have a credit limit of only £99, which, with the perverse higher tariff and standing charges, doesn't go far, especially in cold times such as now. That requires multiple top-ups. Often people who are on legacy prepayment meters live either in rural areas, urban deprived areas devoid of public transport, or have restricted mobility. Will the Minister also undertake to address this other injustice that is already heaped upon those who are poorest and most vulnerable?
Minister.
Well, I think the honourable gentleman is right. He's right to highlight people in rural areas, and in fact the remote Highlands and Islands, which I'm sure the right honourable gentleman will be, if he gets the chance, will question me about as well. And it's absolutely right. We've got to have a system which recognises the sheer geographical and proximity challenges that affect people like that, and have a system, as I say, under unprecedented stress that works at that granular level for ordinary families, often in remote areas. They need help, and we need a system which supports them.
Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Figures from Citizens Advice Bureau show that in Wales, 81,441 people are being disconnected at least once a month, while 24,432 people are being disconnected at least once a week. In October, Ofgem warned suppliers that not enough was being done to identify customers in vulnerable circumstances before installing a prepayment meter. But analysis caused to the Citizens Advice Bureau Consumer Service just in the last month suggests that the practice is ongoing, it's voluntary action and it's not working. So could I repeat the ask to the Minister, will the Government implement a total ban on forced prepayment meter installations until new protections are brought in?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. We have made a call for suppliers voluntarily to stop the practice of forced prepayment meter switching as the answer to households struggling to pay bills, and they should also make a greater effort to help the vulnerable. And we're going to look at the whole system around it, not least following that Ofgem investigation which found failings by energy suppliers in dealing with the most vulnerable people.
Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We must thank Dean Kirby from the iNewspaper for his campaign. He called me because of my prepayment meters campaign in 2016. I also informed him of my experience as a magistrate. I'm disappointed, Minister, that it's taken so long to ensure that those people on prepayment meters don't pay this extra tariff. In my constituency, I had an elderly constituent who had a stroke, no gas in their home. The unintended consequences of smart meters is that they can be switched remotely. The Minister cannot rely on energy suppliers to do the right thing. Can the Minister please take emergency action, and please realise that winter deaths has increased by 20% this year, this winter?
Minister.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. And as one of the issues that was raised by the Right Honourable Gentleman is around the redemption of the energy support vouchers, providing help for people on prepayment meters, and the fact that that is at around 71% as opposed to where we'd like it to be higher is something we need to do, because in this freezing weather, it's more important than ever that those with prepayment meters look out for and redeem their vouchers as a contribution to helping them get through what is a very challenging time.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With respect, the Minister's response to this question has been utterly pathetic. The truth is that the approach the government's taken, this voluntary approach, is not working. It's being said by members on his own side as well as on ours. So the question for the Minister is, will he take the action to prevent people freezing to death this winter, or will he continue to do reviews when the emergency is now? Will he please show the urgency and the scale of response that's needed and tell us that he will take the approach laid out by my right honourable friend from Doncaster North earlier today?
Well, as I've said to the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are urging the suppliers to desist from using these and to do absolutely everything possible to make sure that this doesn't happen. But we also recognise that as a final and last resort, having exhausted everything else, the prepayment meter can be a way of helping people control what otherwise could be an unmanageable debt.
Clive Efford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The entire debate around fuel costs when the prices were spiking up was about the impact on vulnerable people and people who would have to make the choice between heating and eating, and sometimes not being able to make the choice about either. So how is it that it took citizens' advice to expose this scandal and how the government has been asleep at the wheel? Now, the only way to sort this out when we have these forced entry warrants being issued on an industrial scale by magistrates' courts is to impose a moratorium so that we make sure that no one who has a prepayment meter imposed on them is forced into a situation where they can't afford to pay for their fuel costs. Surely that's the minimum the government should do.
Well, as I've made clear to the House, the government absolutely is calling for suppliers to do everything possible to avoid doing this, and I think we're already seeing movement as a result of that call.
Singh Desi.
Thank you very much. Madam Deputy Speaker, you will be aware that prepayment meter customers, many of whom are the least well off within our society, are charged a higher rate for their energy. So does the Minister recognise the huge injustice being forced onto thousands more households as they are shifted onto prepayment meters and onto higher rates? And what will he do to correct that injustice urgently, including issuing a moratorium, hopefully?
Minister.
Well, I've explained that the system which Ofgem enforces and has long enforced is one strictly based on the cost of delivery, and we're going to look at that again to make sure. So we both have to ensure that existing conditions, which Ofgem works with the suppliers on compliance on, is right, but also we have a future system which learns from the current pressures.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In Orkney and Shetland, we have the highest rates of fuel poverty of anywhere in the country, so the premium that is paid by the poorest people in my constituency takes a bad situation and risks making it catastrophic. But we have another problem on top of that, and it is, in fact, we can't get any of the energy companies to install meters in new-built houses in the Northern Isles. So when he next speaks to the energy companies, can he say that when he has stopped them installing meters in the rest of the country that people do not want, they could send some engineers to the Northern Isles to install the meters that new house owners there need?
Well, I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his question, and of course he has raised this with me. There are issues around where the government has intervened to make sure that the distribution costs in the far north of Scotland and the islands are not fully reflected in the prices there, so special exemption has been made there. But he's right, I've also heard about the difficulty of builders getting a meter installed and ensuring that it shouldn't be beyond the wit of man for them to align and work together to make sure that it is run efficiently and people get a meter when they should. And I share his frustration.
I thank the Minister for answering the urgent question. And we will now, before I take any points of order, move to a personal statement. Andrew Bridge.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you for allowing me time to make the following statement, apologising to the House and to the former Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards. Madam Deputy Speaker, this place loses reputation when members fail to maintain the highest possible standards. I respect the rules and traditions of this place, and I accept the ruling of the Standards Committee and the independent expert panel which heard my appeal. I therefore apologise to the House for all my breaches of the Code of Conduct. The committee found that I breached paragraph 12 of the Code on paid advocacy and paragraph 14 on registration and declaration of interest. I should have been more alert to the rules. Madam Deputy Speaker, the committee also criticised me for a letter I wrote to the former Commissioner for Standards during my case after she had completed her investigation. I accept that this letter was inappropriate and I apologise to the former Commissioner, Catherine Stone.
Thank the honourable gentleman for his personal statement. Point of order, Paul Bristow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm really incredibly grateful for you giving me this opportunity. I'm wondering whether you might be able to advise all honourable members on appropriate behaviour in this chamber. Last Tuesday, following a heated debate in this House and a fiery contribution from the honourable member for Brighton Kemp Town, the member in question then left the chamber, returning shortly afterwards, and proceeded to sit on a side bench on the government side of the House, despite there being plenty of space on the opposition benches. He then proceeded to stare at the honourable member for Penistone and Stockbridge. There could be no explanation for this behaviour other than an attempt to intimidate. Could you, Madam Deputy Speaker, confirm that such behaviour is completely inappropriate and that all members have a duty not to attempt to intimidate other members?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for that point of order and for giving me advance notice. I would first of all like him to confirm that he is informed the honourable gentleman who was the subject of the point of order that he was about to make the point of order. I'm glad that he has done so. First of all, as he knows, I did say to the honourable gentleman last week that he needed to moderate his language and that it's not the sort of behaviour we expect in the House. With regard to where the honourable gentleman sat afterwards, he really hasn't had the opportunity to respond to what the honourable gentleman has said. Obviously, I would not like to see any behaviour that was felt to be intimidatory to any other member of the House, but I do hope that he will understand that, having said that, it is very difficult for me to know what was in the honourable gentleman's mind where he sat during the latter part of the debate. With regard to the seats at the end, obviously, as he knows, any honourable gentleman or lady can sit in those seats. But as I said, I would not want to feel that any member of this House felt intimidated by the behaviour of another. And I think we will leave it at that. Thank you. Further to that point of order, Jim Shannon, I do hope we won't prolong this for too long.
Just to say that I also felt particularly disappointed for the Honourable Lady in relation to what happened last week. I know that you yourself, Madam Deputy Speaker, took it upon yourself to remind the Honourable Gentleman of decorum and courtesy in this House, and I thank you for that. I think it's important that we all recognise that we have different opinions and things, but we should respect each other, and sometimes that respect is missing amongst some in this House.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for that further point of order. I think it's only fair to point out that the honourable gentleman for Brighton Kemp Town did apologise the next day for his behaviour and apologise to me as well. So, as I say, I think we should now move on, because we come to the motion relating to the Northern Ireland Budget Bill. Allocation of time, Minister, to move.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Northern Ireland Budget Bill, second reading.
Now,
Minister Steve Baker to move second reading.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as I beg to move that the bill be now read a second time, I begin by asking the Leave of the House that I take all stages of the bill. The Secretary of State sends his apologies. I'm pleased to say he is enjoying a trip to the United States where he is representing Northern Ireland as he seeks to drum up business for local people. Once again, as I stand here, it's with a strong sense of disappointment. At second reading of the Northern Ireland Executive Functions etc. Act 2022, my right honourable friend the Secretary of State said that no Northern Ireland Secretary would wish to introduce a bill of this nature. That sentiment very much applies again today. The Government is bringing forward this legislation because the Northern Ireland parties have been unable to form an executive and subsequently therefore to set a budget. In the absence of an executive, the Government has stepped in to set a budget which the Secretary of State put before the House on the 24th of November last year. We are legislating for that budget today. Setting this budget was not an easy task, Madam Deputy Speaker. Northern Ireland departments and the ministers were in post until Northern Ireland departmental ministers were in post until the 28th of October. And that meant that we could only take over from that point. They had been operating with confirmed spending limits, had not been operating with confirmed spending limits, and they had not implemented plans to deal with their looming overspends. Of course, pressures on Northern Ireland's finances did not happen overnight. Successive former executives have also failed to put finances on a sustainable footing, and as a result, the Government inherited a budget halfway through the year with an overspend of some £660 million. That is unacceptable, and the unsustainability of Northern Ireland's finances cannot continue. Spending per head in Northern Ireland is already at the highest level of any region in the UK. Northern Ireland receives 21% more funding per head than the UK average and has received record levels of financial support. The difficulties that Northern Ireland departments now face are as a result of tough decisions not being taken by elected representatives in Northern Ireland, not just this year, but in successive years before that. Funding alone will not solve these issues. They need strong and responsible leadership shown by a stable, devolved government. I will give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I know the Minister is going to go down the very predictable line that if we had an executive, all this would be sorted out. Can I ask him, how does he then juxtapose his own comments on the 23rd of October when he made it clear that we would not have devolved government in Northern Ireland until unionist demands are met and the jurisdiction of EU law comes to an end? This fallacy that would get the executive there under a magic wand, he admits it is a fallacy, doesn't it?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's no question of admitting any kind of fallacy there. What I was saying on that, with that quote that he referred to, was really a reflection of his own party's position. In a sense, I'm very grateful for his own party's clarity. I think his own party has made it very clear what they require to go back into government. I would say from my engagement with his own party's voters in Northern Ireland, I think those voters know that a price is being paid by not having the executive up. And I think it would be churlish of me not to admit that those voters, it was a small section, but those voters wanted to pay that price. But there will be others in Northern Ireland devastated by the consequences of not having the executive up, and I think it is only fair as a government minister that I reflect the full spectrum of opinion, and that is that people in Northern Ireland very much want the executive back and dealing with the issues before it. As for a magic wand, I'd be the first to admit that government is difficult, whoever's in power. There's no question of a magic wand. All of these decisions are difficult. They're difficult decisions in difficult times, and there's no question of a magic wand, but everyone in this House is aware aware of the devolution settlement, and I'm sure everyone here would want Northern Ireland ministers taking decisions in an accountable way locally in Northern Ireland. But there's no question of a magic wand, and I'd be the first to be realistic about the position that he and his party have set out about their conditions for going back into the Assembly. I will give way once more and then to my honourable friend, but then I will just try and make a bit of progress on the principles.
I'm glad that he accepts that there isn't a magic wand, but would he also accept that given the nature of the executive in Northern Ireland, which is a mandatory coalition, that we have had a Sinn Féin finance minister. I don't think any Sinn Féin finance minister has ever succeeded in presenting a budget which other parties could support. And that is one of the reasons why we're facing the kind of deficit we have at the moment. And indeed, the restoration of the executive makes it very, very difficult, given that you've got ministers who don't even attempt to reflect the spending wishes of the other parties in the executive.
I think he makes some very legitimate points. The particular point about mandatory coalition is, of course, an important part of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, Strand 1, which we completely respect. And we are open to hearing suggestions for institutional reform which would deliver more stable government. But, of course, members opposite will know the difficulties in reforming the institutions. I think the government's very clear that any conversation would need to be led by the political parties of Northern Ireland and would need, in the end, to enjoy cross-community consent in order to be viable. And I give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. You'll probably know that the Select Committee was in Northern Ireland last week. What he might know, which I think endorses and underscores the point that he was making a moment or so ago, that the elections were some little while ago, an analogue time for a digital age, if you will. We were hearing from both traditions, from both communities, a growing sense of worry and anxiety on the impact on the quality of life, outcomes in terms of health and education and housing for ordinary people in Northern Ireland who look to their political leaders of all persuasions to deliver for them, and a growing sense of real anxiety and disappointment that they are being let down yet again.
Yeah, I think my honourable friend is spot on in what he says. I mean, I think if the situation in Northern Ireland presented itself in Wickham or anywhere else in Great Britain, there would be outrage. I mean, 21% higher spending than per head than in the rest of the UK, and not something I wish to repeat too often before it's noticed by my electors. With dreadful public services, as he points out, and about a budget which is not balanced, because of a failure to take really important strategic decisions. I mean, as I'll come on to, we're a number of years on from the Bengoa report, which said there needed to be transformation in order to maximise the quality and quantity of Northern Ireland's health services. And that transformation has not happened, and the public are suffering the consequences today. I think with that, I'll just press forward. The budget position set out on the 24th of November was a difficult one, not unlike the Chancellor's autumn statement in the weeks preceding it, but it is a fair outcome. We are acutely aware of the difficult decisions that now have to be taken in relation to health, to education, and right across the spectrum in Northern Ireland to live within it. Madam Deputy Speaker, in setting the budget that we're legislating for today, it is very clear that action needs to be taken to get Northern Ireland's finances under control and to deliver the much-needed and long-promised transformation of public services to which I referred earlier. 6 years on from the Bengoa report, we are yet to see the Executive deliver the changes which are necessary. This work needs to happen now, but it requires leadership and strategic decisions that should rightly be taken